There comes a moment in a person's life when they quietly realize something terrifying. Not when they fail, not when they lose money, or love, or status, but when they become afraid to continue. Because failure hurts. But continuing while exhausted, continuing while uncertain, continuing while nobody believes in you, that requires a kind of courage most people never develop. And maybe that is why so many people slowly disappear long before they actually die. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Most people hear that quote and think it sounds inspirational. But if you sit with it long enough, it becomes deeply unsettling because it forces you to confront a painful truth. There is no permanent arrival in life, no final victory, no lasting safety, no moment where suffering completely stops. The mountain simply changes shape, and for adults carrying the invisible weight of life, that realization can feel unbearable, especially at night, when the house is finally quiet, when the phone stops ringing, when the responsibilities pause just long enough for your thoughts to become louder than the world around you. That is when many people secretly ask themselves questions they never say out loud. Did I waste my life? Am I becoming irrelevant? Why do I feel empty even after trying so hard? How much longer can I keep carrying this? And the frightening part is, many of these people look perfectly normal from the outside. They go to work, pay bills, smile in conversations, take care of families, reply I'm fine, but internally, they are exhausted from holding themselves together. Modern life has created a strange kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of physically being alone, but the loneliness of feeling emotionally unseen. Especially for adults who spent years believing that if they just worked harder, sacrificed more, stayed responsible, eventually peace would come. But life rarely works that way. Because the truth most people discover too late is this. Achievement can silence insecurity temporarily, but it cannot heal emptiness. And many people spend decades chasing external success while internally collapsing in silence. That is why some wealthy people still feel miserable, why some successful men feel emotionally numb, why some parents secretly feel disconnected from their own lives, why some people achieve everything they once prayed for and still feel nothing when they finally get it. Because success was never final. It never could be. Human beings adapt frighteningly fast. The promotion becomes normal. The salary becomes normal. The new house becomes normal. The attention fades. The excitement fades. Even pain becomes routine. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. But ancient philosophers understood it long before science gave it a name. The Stoics warned that attaching identity to external outcomes would eventually destroy inner peace. Because anything external can disappear. Money, beauty, status, health, relationships, even youth itself. And maybe that is why aging frightens so many people. Not simply because the body changes, but because time exposes illusions. At 25, people think life is about becoming someone. At 45, many quietly realize life is actually about not losing yourself completely while trying to survive. And survival changes people. It hardens them, distracts them, exhausts them. Little by little, many adults stop living intentionally and begin operating mechanically. Wake up, work, pay bills, scroll, sleep, repeat. Years pass this way, not dramatically, not catastrophically, just quietly. And quiet destruction is often the most dangerous kind. Because when suffering is loud, people react. But when suffering becomes familiar, people normalize it. That is how dreams die, not through failure, but through slow emotional surrender. One postponed goal at a time, one compromise at a time, 1 year of saying maybe later, until one day the mirror reflects someone older, tired, and unfamiliar. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing you abandoned parts of yourself just to survive. And almost nobody talks honestly about it, especially men. Many men are taught early that their value comes from performance. provide, protect, produce. So they become experts at suppressing emotion. They learn how to function while bleeding internally. And society rewards this. People admire Stoicism externally, without realizing many individuals are silently drowning beneath it. A man can be respected by everyone around him and still feel completely alone inside his own mind. Because responsibility often isolates people emotionally, especially those who always appear strong. Nobody asks the strong person if they are tired. Nobody notices when the dependable person begins emotionally disappearing. And eventually, many adults become strangers to themselves, not because they are weak, but because they spent too many years becoming what life demanded instead of protecting who they truly were. That is why courage matters more than success. Because continuing does not simply mean moving forward physically. Sometimes continuing means refusing to emotionally collapse. Sometimes continuing means waking up after disappointment and trying again without applause. Sometimes it means rebuilding your identity after life humbles you. And life humbles everyone eventually. That is one of the few guarantees. The businessman loses money. The athlete loses youth. The beautiful lose beauty. The powerful lose influence. The energetic lose time. Life strips every human being eventually, not to punish them, but to reveal them. And what remains underneath that stripping process determines the quality of a person's soul. This is why some people become wiser through suffering, while others become bitter. Pain itself is not transformative. Awareness is. Two people can experience the same failure. One becomes resentful. The other becomes awake. One collapses into victimhood. The other develops depth. Because suffering either deepens consciousness or deepens self-destruction. And unfortunately, many people cope with emotional pain unconsciously. They distract themselves constantly. Endless scrolling, noise, consumption, temporary pleasure, busy schedules, alcohol, validation, escapism, anything to avoid sitting alone with their own thoughts. Because silence reveals uncomfortable truths. It reveals regret. Regret for wasted years. Regret for postponed dreams. Regret for becoming passive in your own life. Regret for betraying your younger self. And perhaps the deepest regret of all, realizing you were alive, but not truly living. There is a difference, a massive difference. Some people breathe for 80 years without ever fully arriving inside their own existence. They survive, but they never awaken. And awakening is painful, because awareness destroys comforting illusions. You begin noticing how temporary everything is. Parents aging, children growing distant, friends disappearing, energy fading, time accelerating. When people are young, they think life moves slowly. Then suddenly they are middle-aged, wondering where entire decades went. And the terrifying truth is, time feels faster the more unconscious your life becomes. Routine erases memory. That is why emotionally empty years feel blurry in hindsight. The human mind remembers meaning, not repetition, which is why many adults struggle with a quiet existential grief they cannot explain. They are not just mourning lost opportunities. They are mourning lost presence, lost moments, lost attention, lost years spent emotionally absent from their own lives. This is why discipline is not merely about productivity. Real discipline is spiritual. It is the refusal to abandon yourself. Every small act of consistency becomes a vote for the person you are trying not to lose. Going to the gym when emotionally exhausted. Saving money when pleasure is tempting. Remaining calm during chaos. Keeping promises nobody sees. Choosing growth instead of resentment. These things appear small externally, but internally, they reshape identity. Behavioral psychology shows that identity is built through repeated action, not intentions, not fantasies, not motivational speeches. Actions. The brain watches what you repeatedly do, then slowly decides who you are. If you constantly quit, your mind begins associating you with weakness. If you constantly delay, your identity becomes fragmented. But if you continue despite discomfort, something changes internally. Self-respect quietly returns. And self-respect is one of the rarest forms of peace in the modern world, because many people secretly dislike themselves. Not publicly, not consciously, but privately. They know how often they betrayed their own standards, how many times fear controlled them, how many excuses became habits. That internal disappointment slowly poisons the spirit, not immediately, but over years, and eventually it manifests as anxiety, emptiness, irritability, emotional numbness. People think they are tired from work. Sometimes they are actually tired from internal conflict, tired of living disconnected from who they know they could become. This is why courage matters so much. Not dramatic courage, quiet courage, the kind nobody applauds. The courage to restart at 50. The courage to heal childhood wounds at 40. The courage to admit loneliness. The courage to change destructive habits. The courage to leave environments destroying your soul. The courage to become a beginner again. That last one is especially difficult, because adulthood often traps people inside pride. People would rather remain miserable than inexperienced. So they stay in careers they hate, relationships that drain them, identities that no longer fit, all because starting over threatens the ego. But sometimes the old version of you must psychologically die for a new life to begin. And death, even symbolic death, always feels terrifying. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And he was right, because facing yourself honestly is exhausting. You begin noticing patterns, how fear controlled decisions, how insecurity shaped relationships, how ego sabotaged growth, how comfort quietly became a prison. Comfort is seductive because it feels safe, but psychologically, comfort often creates invisible suffering. A comfortable life without meaning becomes emotional anesthesia. You stop growing, stop risking, stop evolving, and eventually you begin feeling strangely lifeless. Not because life ended, but because aliveness requires tension. Human beings need purpose more than pleasure. Without purpose, even comfort becomes unbearable. That is why some retirees become depressed despite financial security. Why wealthy celebrities still feel empty. Why many successful people secretly spiral into addiction. The human soul does not thrive on comfort alone. It needs meaning, responsibility, growth, contribution, direction. Viktor Frankl, who survived concentration camps, observed something profound. Those who had meaning were far more psychologically resilient during suffering, not because pain disappeared, but because purpose transformed pain into sacrifice instead of punishment. And that changes everything. A difficult life without meaning feels cruel. A difficult life with meaning feels honorable. That distinction determines whether suffering destroys a person or matures them, because suffering is unavoidable. Everyone eventually loses something. Health, time, dreams, people they love. No human escapes this. Which means the real question is not whether life will hurt you. The real question is, what will pain turn you into? Will it make you smaller, more cynical, more emotionally closed? Or will it deepen your compassion, your wisdom, your awareness of what truly matters? Some of the calmest people you will ever meet are not calm because life was easy. They are calm because life broke their illusions. They no longer expect permanence from temporary things. And strangely, that acceptance creates peace. Not happiness in the childish sense, but peace. A grounded understanding that life will always contain uncertainty, that emotions rise and fall, that success comes and goes, that failure does not define identity unless you surrender to it completely. This is why courage to continue matters more than outcomes, because outcomes constantly change, but character compounds. Quietly, daily, like interest accumulating in a hidden account nobody sees. Every disciplined decision strengthens you. Every honest confrontation matures you. Every moment of restraint develops inner stability. And over time, People either become psychologically stronger or psychologically dependent, dependent on distraction, dependent on validation, dependent on comfort, dependent on external approval. But external approval is one of the most dangerous addictions because it hands your emotional life to strangers. A person controlled by approval will eventually betray themselves to avoid rejection. And many adults have spent entire lives shape-shifting for acceptance, trying to appear successful, trying to appear needed, trying to appear strong. Meanwhile, internally, they feel exhausted from performing. There is tremendous freedom in finally admitting you do not need to win every battle to respect yourself. You only need to keep showing up honestly. That changes the entire emotional architecture of life. Suddenly, failure becomes information instead of identity. Embarrassment becomes temporary. Rejection becomes survivable. Pain becomes educational. And ironically, this mindset often produces more external success anyway. Because people who stop fearing failure become psychologically dangerous in the best possible way. They become resilient. And resilience is rarer than talent. Anyone can feel motivated temporarily. Very few can remain consistent while discouraged. Very few can continue after humiliation, after heartbreak, after financial collapse, after aging changes their confidence, after life refuses to reward their effort immediately. That is where real transformation happens. Not during inspiration, during resistance, during the mornings nobody sees, the nights filled with doubt, the periods where nothing seems to work. Those moments reveal who someone truly is. Because character is not built when life becomes easy. Character is revealed when continuing feels emotionally expensive. And maybe this is the hidden tragedy of modern culture. People are taught to chase visible success without developing internal endurance. So when difficulty inevitably arrives, they psychologically shatter, not because they lacked intelligence, but because nobody taught them how to suffer meaningfully. Ancient philosophy understood something modern culture forgot. A meaningful life is not pain-free. It is psychologically integrated. There is a difference. Integration means becoming whole, accepting both strength and weakness, ambition and limitation, hope and grief, confidence and fear. Mature people stop trying to eliminate all darkness from life. Instead, they learn how to carry it without becoming consumed by it. That is wisdom, not pretending everything is positive, but refusing to let suffering make you unconscious. And perhaps that is what courage truly is. Not loud confidence, not dominance, not fearlessness, but the quiet decision to remain open-hearted despite disappointment, to continue trying despite uncertainty, to continue loving despite loss, to continue growing despite age, to continue believing life still matters despite regret. Because regret can either destroy a person or awaken them. There are people in their 60s who are spiritually younger than people in their 20s. And there are people in their 20s already emotionally defeated. Age is not merely biological. It is psychological. Some people stop evolving early. They become rigid, cynical, emotionally closed. Others remain alive internally, curious, reflective, humble enough to change. Those people age differently, not physically, but spiritually. And in the end, that spiritual condition matters more than most people realize. Because one day achievement disappears, the titles vanish, the career ends, the applause fades, and eventually every person is left alone with one terrifying question. Did I become someone I can respect? Not someone admired, someone respected internally. That answer determines the quality of your final years. Because people can escape many things, but they cannot escape themselves forever. Eventually silence arrives, and silence tells the truth, which is why the courage to continue is sacred, not because it guarantees success, but because it protects the soul from surrender. And maybe right now, that is exactly what someone listening to this needed to hear. Not more hype, not another promise of overnight transformation, just the reminder that being human is difficult, that exhaustion does not mean failure, That fear does not mean weakness. That slow progress is still progress. That meaning often grows quietly, like roots underground before anything visible appears. There will still be painful mornings, lonely nights, moments of doubt. But if you continue consciously, something subtle begins happening. You stop measuring life only by achievement and start measuring it by alignment. Are you becoming more honest, more disciplined, more peaceful, more courageous, more awake? Those questions matter far more than most metrics society worships. Because a calm soul is worth more than public approval. And a person who can endure life without losing their humanity has already achieved something extraordinary. So perhaps the real meaning of that quote was never about success or failure at all. Perhaps it was about identity, about refusing to let temporary circumstances decide who you become, about understanding that life will humble everyone eventually, but not everyone will grow from it. And in a world obsessed with appearance, there is something deeply powerful about quietly continuing anyway, without applause, without certainty, without guarantees, just continuing, one honest step at a time. And maybe that is what truly separates people in the end. Not talent, not intelligence, not luck, but the ability to continue carrying the weight of life without allowing it to harden the heart completely. Because that is rare. And in many ways, that is courage.